Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first lecture of the season. We're going to go over a few housekeeping rules and then get started. Please turn your cell phones off. Please be careful if you whisper during this presentation because we now have surround sound and microphones everywhere, so what you whisper can be heard in the future YouTubes. So just giving you a heads up on that. Our talks go for 45 minutes, and then at 1:45, we have a 15-minute opportunity for questions, if anybody should have any questions. These lectures are sponsored by the Bayside History Museum, the Calvert Library, and the John Hanson Daughters of the American Revolution. It is now my privilege to introduce a very wonderful historian, Mary Rockefeller. She retired from the United States Postal Service in Washington, D.C., where she finished her 40-year career as a personal assistant to the Postmaster General. After taking more than 2 years to organize family photos and papers, she decided to volunteer at the Calvert County Historical Society. She's been a volunteer for 18 years and has been the archivist for the Calvert County Historical Society for the past 2 years. She helps customers with research. She compiles files on Calvert County, including the families, churches, schools, historic homes, and a variety of other topics and subjects. She has published 2 books, The Early Schools of Calvert County, Maryland, which you see right here, and her latest book is Looking Back at Calvert County, Maryland, which is the subject of today's lecture. The latest book includes short essays on churches, summer camps, post offices, Calvert emblems and symbols, the old Hunting Creek Bridge, several African-American ministers and 1 doctor, and the recently bulldozed down raised National Armory in Prince Frederick. So it is a real privilege for me to introduce Mary. And if you like her talk and you're interested in her book, they'll have some in the back after the talk if you'd like to buy one. Come on down, Mary.
Thank you very much. Today, I do a great deal of my Calvert County research online, where you can find a variety of references, and these include books, minutes of church conventions and newsletters, thousands of newspapers, and the Maryland State Archives online. I come across so many interesting topics, and I always want to know more. Sadly, I also know how much of our history is gone. The British burned the courthouse in 1814, and many very early records were lost. Later, the fire of 1882 destroyed every remaining record. Nothing was saved from that fire. A few deeds were re-recorded, but really not that many. When I did my research for the earlier book on schools, I loved the thrill of learning, but I had to make myself stay on task and not veer off onto other subjects. This gave me the idea for writing a book on people and places of our past that I had run across during my earlier research. There is no particular reason for choosing any subject other than the fact that I found it interesting and, most importantly, could actually find resource material. I've always been interested in the various churches in Calvert, where they were located, and when they were built. In 2009, my husband and I took photos of every church in the county, including some markers where former churches once stood. I might add that some former churches have no markers. I put these in a photo album and tried to write a little blurb about each. And that sounds pretty easy until you actually try to do it. Some churches have very good historical information, some very little. The most surprising thing of all was that many of them had absolutely no interest in sharing their history. Some churches have come and gone and have left very little trace. The first churches in Calvert were the Church of England, which became Episcopal after the American Revolution. Our first two parishes were Christ Church in 1672 and All Saints in 1692. The Episcopal Church was officially established in 1789, but the move from the Church of England had been underway prior to that date. Today, we have four Episcopal churches: All Saints, Christ Church, Middleham St. Peter's, and St. Paul's in Prince Frederick. These churches have been established for a very long time and have their own published histories. John Wesley, who was an Anglican priest in England, started the Methodist Society within the Church of England. He thought that the reform could be done within the church rather than separating from that faith. Methodism was very popular with the poor and working classes, freed and enslaved African Americans, and women. Wesley considered women equal in the eyes of God and encouraged them to become class leaders and lay preachers, but they could not become Methodist ministers. In 1771, Wesley selected Francis Asbury to bring the Methodist faith to British America, and Asbury remained here throughout the American Revolution. They were called Methodists because of their methodical devotion to study and religious duties. After the Revolution, it was not possible to remain in the Church of England, and the Methodist Episcopal Church was established in the United States on December 24, 1784, at the Lovely Lane Meeting House in Baltimore, Maryland. The General Conference is the highest legislative body of the Methodist Church and sets policies and governs the entire church. Next, there are regional conferences. Calvert County is under the Baltimore-Washington Conference. It is thought the first Methodist Episcopal churches in Calvert were at Hallowing Point about 1790, and for some reason, people in Calvert always called that Holland Point, with Plum Point and St. John's at Lusby around the same time or a bit later. In the beginning, both whites and African Americans would have attended the same churches. Whites sat in the main area, and African Americans sat in the balcony. Some, if not all, seated women on one side of the center aisle and men on the other. Holland Point became Asbury Methodist and remained all white after slavery was abolished. Both Plum Point and St. John's were later sold to the African American congregations. These two churches are still predominantly African American today. We do not have photos of any of those early churches, but this is Brown's United Methodist, built in 1898 and still standing. And I'm just showing this as an example of how a fairly early church looked. They didn't look anything like a church looks today. Asbury was one of three Methodist churches that were combined to become Trinity United Methodist in Prince Frederick. These were Asbury, Central, and Wesley Memorial. The name Trinity was chosen to represent the joining of three churches into one, in addition to referring to God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. And this is Asbury as it appeared in 1915. And this church was located very close to the current Asbury Cemetery on Route 231. This was their second building. Some of you have probably seen a very small graveyard in Dunkirk on Route 4 in front of the Safeway Shopping Center. This burial ground belonged to Shiloh Methodist Episcopal Church South, established in 1867 and closed in 1939. It was formally decommissioned in 1962. Shiloh was one of Calvert's South churches, having separated from Smithville Methodist Episcopal in Dunkirk. Today, the small cemetery belongs to Smithville. And this is Shiloh. This was the second church. The first one would have been of log. This one was built in 1885, and this photo was taken in 1955. And can't you see how rural Calvert was? The Methodist Episcopal Church South began in 1844 when conference delegates in the southern United States separated from the General Conference over the right to own slaves. In 1800, the Methodist Church had declared slavery a national evil, and conference delegates were asked to encourage state legislatures to abolish slavery. Methodist clergymen were forbidden from holding slaves no matter where they lived. Even so, slavery in the South was largely ignored because the economy was so dependent on it. A new General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church South was officially established on May 17, 1845. Now there were two general conferences, Methodist Episcopal and Methodist Episcopal South. However, no South churches were established in Calvert County until after the Civil War and slavery had been abolished. The Emancipation Proclamation took place on January 1, 1863, but only applied to states that had seceded from the Union. Maryland never seceded, and slavery was not abolished until a new constitution was adopted on November 1, 1864. We had 7 South churches in Calvert. They were Bethel, Calvary, Central, Emmanuel, Shiloh, St. Paul and Lusby, and Trinity in Mutual. In 1939, the two general conferences reunited to form the Methodist Church. However, the two churches had remained apart for 95 years. Later, in 1968, the church reorganized again and became United Methodist. The baffling thing is, to me, is that although slavery had ended, 7 South churches were still established in Calvert after the Civil War. Also, what caused the Methodist Episcopal and Methodist Episcopal South churches to remain apart for 95 years? It was basically the same Methodist faith. There were several different types of Methodist churches in Calvert owned by African Americans that were not part of either conference. 2 were Union American Methodists, which evolved from the African American Methodist Church, and 1 was Independent Methodist that came out of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Again, basically Methodist, but they could own and operate their own churches independently since they were not governed by a conference. All 3 of these churches were located in the Lusby area, in what is now Park Chesapeake. Then it was called Harrod's Hill because a lot of people named Herod lived there. Very little information has been found on either of these churches, but they did exist. Additionally, there were 2 AME churches, which is African Methodist Episcopal. 1 was in the former Mutual area, now Port Republic, and 1 in the former Adelina area, now Prince Frederick. Again, very little information has been found on those as well. I have included 11 summer camps, once located in Calvert, none of which were for Calvert children until 1970, when Camp King's Landing was established. King's Landing became as Camp Druid Hill, a YMCA camp for African American boys from the Baltimore area. The Colored YMCA of Baltimore was established in 1893 but had no facilities. In 1911, Julius Rosenwald, president of Sears Roebuck and a philanthropist, pledged $25,000 to any city that could raise $75,000 towards establishing an African American YMCA branch location. In response to this challenge, the Colored YMCA raised $31,000, the White YMCA donated $50,000, and Mr. Rosenwald donated $25,000. The Druid Hill branch was built in 1918 in Baltimore. During World Wars I and II, it served as a place where male African American military personnel could stay and participate in recreational activities. It also had the only indoor pool in the local area where African American children were allowed to swim. The property for Camp Druid Hill was purchased in 1946 in Huntingtown on the Patuxent River at the end of current King's Landing Road. They bought 386 acres and within 6 months sold 125 of those, and I could not find out why they did that. Although a few underprivileged children were sponsored to attend this camp, most attendees were from middle-class African-American families from the Baltimore area. Now, this is a photo from a newspaper, so it's terrible. But this is the new, in 1952, the new Druid Hill Dining Hall. It had every modern convenience, and it could seat 100 people. Camp Druid Huntingtown and Camp Kenoi Lusby were owned by the same YMCA central headquarters in Baltimore. Camp Kenoi was established in 1913 and first had its camp on the South River near Edgewater. That camp was moved to Calvert in 1931. And here is an ad for that camp, which reads, "A new Camp Kenoi camp for boys of Baltimore. The Y announces a new permanent Camp Kenoi for the summer 1931 on the most glorious part of the Chesapeake Bay, 75 miles south of Baltimore, 2 miles from Crane Highway," which I think is an error. 150 acres of woodland and field with nearly a mile of sandy beach. Its motto, "Better a boy molded than a man mended." The Baltimore YMCA had started some integration in 1954, which began in these two camps in 1958. The name of Camp Druid Hill was changed to Camp Mohawk in 1961 as part of the integration program. Another big change was that Mohawk offered a season for girls, but at different time from the boys. Kenoi continued always as a boys-only camp. In 1968, Mohawk and Kenoi were merged. Construction had started on the nuclear power plant in June 1968. The Camp Kenoi property was sold to the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company in November of that same year for possible expansion of the power plant. Kenoi had the right to use the campgrounds for an additional 3 years, but remained open for only 1 more year. All camping was then moved to Mohawk and Huntingtown. The name was changed again to Camp King's Landing in 1970. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the late author Tom Clancy, who built an elaborate home in Calvert on part of the property once called Kaufman Camp for Boys and Girls. That camp was built in 1951 and financed by wealthy Jewish businessmen, doctors, and lawyers from the Washington, D.C. area, and first called Camp Washington. It was renamed Camp Kaufman for Boys and Girls in 1955 in honor of Cecil Kaufman, who was its president. He and his brother Joel owned K Jewelers and were major benefactors. Although predominantly for Jewish children, the camp was open to those of other faiths as well. It also sponsored children from underprivileged backgrounds, but by and large, most paid the full rate. By 1978, the camp was having financial difficulties and seems to have closed about 1982 or 83. The property was sold to an organization called Camp Morona, and that only lasted a year or two, and then the property was offered for sale again. Before Larry Hogan became our governor, he was in real estate and sold the former camp property to Tom Clancy. A newspaper reported that Mr. Hogan had recently completed the sale of a 100-plus acre resort camp with over 2,000 feet frontage on the Chesapeake Bay in Calvert County. The campground was described as follows. The site was formerly owned by Kaufman Camp for Boys and Girls and included sleeping accommodations for over 300, an Olympic-sized pool, tennis and basketball courts, football, baseball, and soccer fields, and archery and rifle ranges. There were dozens of buildings, including a mess hall with a commercial kitchen, entertainment hall, and a director's residence. Mr. Hogan said the owners could no longer afford to operate the camp. Now, this is the main entrance up to Camp Kaufman. And just for fun, here's Tom Clancy's house, which sold for $4.9 million. One of my favorite camps was the Catholic Christ Child Girls Camp located in Island Creek. It was a camp for underprivileged white girls from the Washington, D.C. metro area and operated by the Christ Child Society, founded by a young disabled woman named Mary Merrick, who had inherited a lot of money. My mother-in-law was on its board and recording secretary for a while, so I had a little more personal insight for this particular camp. The property, consisting of 87.6 acres, was purchased by a man named Charles DeJulian, who gifted it to the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. The portion along the Patuxent shore was set aside for the Christ Child Camp. In addition to the land, Mr. DeJulian paid for all the grounds development and associated buildings. Eventually, all of the property was deeded to the Christ Child Society, which they held until 2003. When sold in 2003, the Christ Child Society donated $1 million of that money to the Victory Youth Centers to build the Mary Virginia Merrick Recreation Center in Southeast Washington, D.C. There were many wealthy people associated with the Christ Child Society, starting with its founder, Mary Merrick. Camps for boys and girls, originally called fresh air camps because she thought that all the children ought to get out of the city for a while, were primarily supported by teas held by society ladies, where they raised $12,000 at each tea. In comparison, we hold teas at the Historical Society and are lucky to make $400 or $500, so this was a lot of money. In fact, it was about $146,700 buying power in 2025. Some camp sessions were free, depending on income level. Others charged the going rate. Participants were not limited to Catholic children. In 1931, the Society established a camp for African American girls in Belle Alton, Charles County, Maryland, with trained counselors, wholesome food, and a free dental clinic. The camp was operated by Mrs. Addie Spriggs, who was African American, and it distributed infant clothes to needy families. There was no charge to attend that camp. On a board trip to the Island Creek camp, my mother-in-law met Ethel Kennedy, who was associated with the Christ Child Society, so I think you can see there was some money. She also remembered planning Christmas gifts for underprivileged children. When a committee suggested buying a dress for each girl, the board members said, no, that was just too expensive. When the committee reported that you could buy a dress from Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward for about $2, they were amazed because they'd never even heard of those stores. Camps were just one of the many charitable services done by the Christ Child Society, which is still in operation today. And this is a copy of a flyer from their camp in 1961, and you can see where they are along the shore there. And that's a lovely piece of property. I have been there. I did not cover Camp Roosevelt in Chesapeake Beach or Camp Chesapeake, an African-American Boy Scout camp in Lusby. The Bayside History Museum has a wonderful display on and history on Camp Roosevelt, and Grace Mary Brady and Vincent Turner have already published a book on Camp Chesapeake, which you can buy at the Bayside History Museum. There was a Camp Reed Catholic camp in Dares Beach that I was not able to verify enough information to write an article. The land was owned by St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church in Washington, D.C., and used as a Boy Scout camp, but never actually incorporated as a camp. Hopefully this will be covered by the folks working on a history of Dares Beach. I worked for Postal Service headquarters for 40 years, and I watched how it went from sorting all mail by hand to using very large automated systems. I have included a short article listing all of the post offices once found in Calvert. Calvert has had some type of mail route since 1695, and the book does have a copy of a map with that mail route. At one time, we had 62 post offices, and now there are only 12. The problem that occurs when a post office closes is that the town loses its identity and takes on the one to which it is assigned. For instance, Poplars, Randall Cliff, West Beach, Willows all became Chesapeake Beach because those post offices were discontinued and the delivery areas assigned to Chesapeake Beach. If you or your family have been in the area for a long time, you might still say you live in that earlier area. However, a newcomer will call it by its current name. I found several interesting postal route maps, 1891, 1897, and 1903, that are in the book. In addition to showing the mail routes, you can find the names of places in Calvert at the time. I included a section on 4 African Americans who became ministers and one who became a doctor. The doctor was born in Island Creek, but had to go to Frederick, Maryland to practice medicine. Even in Frederick, he could not practice at the local hospital, and no African Americans could be admitted, no matter how sick. He and another doctor built a small hospital for African American patients. And this is a picture of Dr. Ulysses Grant Bourne. He was married twice. He had 3 children. The son became a doctor, one daughter became a doctor. She was the first female doctor in the Frederick County, and the other daughter became a nurse. Two of the ministers were Carroll brothers, and two were Brown brothers. Nathaniel and Henry Carroll were born to a free mother and an enslaved father. Their mother, Sarah, and both boys were listed as free blacks in 1832. To buy her husband's freedom, Sarah bound Henry, who was 11, and Nathaniel, who was 13, to George W. Dow until each boy turned 21, at which time the debt was paid. She either received money to buy her husband's freedom, or Mr. Dow paid it. I found nothing to say how the transaction was handled, nor did I find where her husband was enslaved. I discovered through a Williamsburg Foundation magazine that this type of binding was sometimes used to buy freedom, and I did not know that before. These were legal agreements and required that the children had to be fed, clothed, and given a basic education and taught some type of skill so that they could earn a living. This was also a common practice for orphan boys and girls. The orphanages did not keep them. Both boys are listed on the 1850 census for Calvert, living with George Dow and Prince Frederick. Although it is probable they worked for Dow, they are not identified as servants or laborers. Dow's daughters taught both of them to read and write. Mr. Dow took them to Asbury Methodist Episcopal Church, and they became Methodist. Both went on to become ministers. Obituaries for both men stated they willingly agreed to the arrangement and were proud to have obtained their father's freedom. One of them also said that Mr. Dow gave them every opportunity to improve their mind. After slavery was abolished, Nathaniel was one of the 16 African American ministers who left the White Baltimore Conference and formed the African American Washington Conference. Prior to this, African Americans could preach, but whites ran their churches. And this is Nathaniel M. Carroll. He usually went by N.M. Carroll, and he did a lot of things with the Methodist Church. Thomas Brown, his mother Sarah, and brother Nathaniel, have you noticed everybody's named the same thing, were all free by 1832. Thomas was a waterman, farmer, and minister. He owned 2 schooners and about 350 acres of land as early as 1865 and 1866. The 1870 census listed his personal income as $1,000 a year and his real estate at $1,500. This was higher than many others at the time, both African American and white. He was a minister at Brooks Methodist Episcopal Church for 37 years and died at the age of 96. It was said, quote, he practiced truth, love, honesty, and left a precious legacy, a good name for his children. And this is Thomas Brown. Emblems and symbols of Calvert. Emblems are something entirely unique to the county, and symbols are found here but not necessarily unique. Our flag and seal are emblems. Our dog, American foxhound, bird is a purple martin, tree is a ball cypress, the flower is the mountain laurel, and the insect is zebra swallowtail butterfly. The song is called the Cavaliers of Calvert. They're all symbols, and I bet you didn't know we had all those symbols. The seal and song were created for the tercentenary celebration in 1954. And here are the seals, and I say seals because the 1954 is the original and still the official seal. And that was used until 1990s, and the county government said it did not reproduce well on vehicles and other equipment, and they wanted something a little bit simpler. So the one in 1994 was designed, but the one on the left is still our official seal. The flag came later in 1966, but went through several designs before it became what we have today. In fact, in 1996, some people wanted the tobacco leaf completely removed from the flag since they thought it encouraged smoking. Fortunately, our heritage prevailed and the leaf remained. I doubt very much that flag encouraged anyone to smoke. Now, to show you several flags that we have at the Historical Society. This one has, I think it's the 1966. I kind of think it's the first one because of the shape of the tobacco leaf, which is odd. And here are the folks with the new flag in 1967, and the lady with the hat is Jane Coffin. She designed the flag. That's a photo from the Calvert Independent. And then they thought we should have a cured tobacco leaf on the flag. So they drew up this design, and they could not find a flag maker who could replicate the brown of cured tobacco. So they scrapped that. That was never produced. And then they came up with this one with sort of a tobacco leaf. And, of course, the colors from the Maryland flag and a red and white border. And then somehow it lost its border and stem, and I can't find out how it did that. That's how it looks today. And by the way, that's not gold, it's called yellow, because yellow was the color prescribed for Calvert way back by the colonial legislature. Now, this is not a symbol, but how many of you remember this sign with the standing cavalier that got stolen several times? Since the book is about our past, I've included the Maryland Army National Guard Armory as being the latest to move over to the gone category. A basic armory and garage were constructed in 1950 with the addition of the main building in 1953. Company A, 121st Engineer Battalion Combat, was assigned to the armory. The unit was described as being made up of farmers, watermen, and lumbermen who specialized in building bridges. An article said, quote, "They fit the bill for engineer troops, where the ability to handle anything from an axe to a bulldozer, as well as an M1 rifle is the prime requisite," end quote. The armory was named for Controller Louis L. Goldstein in 1999 in honor of all that he had done to get the armory in Calvert. He was quite an advocate for that. According to a newspaper report, the armory was not used after 2008. But it was much more than just an armory to Calvert. It also functioned as a venue for community social activities such as parties and dances, as well as athletic events. Even today, Calvert still does not have many locations large enough to handle big crowds. I was very lucky because someone donated a handful of snapshots to the Historical Society, and these were taken in 1952 of a National Guard parade through Prince Frederick back in the days when Armory Road was part of the main route through Calvert, then Route 2. There was no Route 4 at that time. And these are just the little black and white slides. And on this slide on the left is where the armory would have stood. And it's the bank is sort of raised there, so they've either flattened it out or raised the road. I don't know which. Still, look at how rural it was down in that area. This is the photo showing that it was named Controller Louis L. Goldstein Armory, and that photo was taken by my husband in 2019. And there's a photo of the whole thing, of which there can be no photos because it's gone. For those of you who may have noticed at some time a concrete bridge in the woods at the intersection of Route 4 and Plum Point Road behind Chesapeake Collision, you can learn why that old bridge is there. A concrete bridge was built in 1911 and crossed Hunting Creek on the north-south route in Calvert prior to 1939. As early as 1847, the Maryland General Assembly levied a property tax to build a, quote, good bridge over Hunting Creek. That would have been a wooden bridge, of course. You might recall this area was the first location of Huntingtown with a navigable port, warehouses, and homes. It was used for shipping tobacco and collecting taxes during colonial times. Huntingtown was established in 1683 and destroyed by the British in 1814. Since Hunting Creek was silting up and larger ships could not get into the port, citizens began building homes and stores farther north to where Huntingtown sits today. In 1939, The road was changed to the current alignment, but as a two-lane highway with a new bridge, and the old bridge was abandoned but still stands. In 1969, this two-lane highway became the two southbound lanes of today's Route 4, and two new lanes were constructed on the northbound side. And again, my husband took these in 2009. That's what the old bridge looks like. Still standing, but it's barely. And that's the road bed for it. So that's what people used to drive on. And that's a very narrow, how many?
22 feet.
22 feet between the sides of the bridge. So this is a synopsis of some of the stories that are included in the book. As Grace Mary mentioned, I do have some for sale if you're interested. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much for coming. And thanks to Grace Mary Brady and the Bayside History Museum for inviting me. Are there? Thank you. So are there any questions that I can possibly answer?
Ma'am, fascinating presentation. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate all the hard work you put into research in the county here. On the emblem, between the initial one, well, I guess it's still the official one, as you explained, and the newer one, they both had a cornucopia, but the first one, the official one, seemed to have something behind it. It almost looked like an oyster shell.
There are, I don't know if I can get back.
I was trying to identify what it actually was.
I don't know if I, oh, he'll have to. They're pretty much the same things in both of them. They're just, I think it's made, the original one has like a rope going around it, which when it comes together, it fades out a bit. I don't have the,
Yeah, that one there.
yes.
It looked like the cornucopia was.
Yeah,
on
see,
top
that's
of
an oyster shell.
It is? Okay.
Oyster shell, tobacco leaf, cornucopia, and then the rope and anchors. That's to represent the watermen and the bounty of the seafood in the area. Tobacco, of course, as you all know, was called the money crop because that's exactly what it was. And then we had an abundance of good food and everything in the area. And most of those things are over in the other one as well. You can see the rope and the oyster shells down at the bottom. And the black-eyed Susan is the state flower, so that's incorporated into it. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you all coming, and it's